Welcome back to part 2, where we're talking to Dr. Ian Rubenstein about his psychic experiences as a GP and as a medium, but also his knowledge of the Enfield Poltergeist, where he actually bases his practice. So we were just chatting in the break there a little bit about good and evil and simultaneous time. So we thought we might as well just carry on that topic so that you guys out there can take a listen. So Andy, you was asking Ian, what do we think of good and evil, or what is good and evil? Is that right?
Yeah. So we promise you viewers we will go back to the Enfield Poltergeist. But yeah, I mean, in a way, it does kind of like connect in terms of like angels or demons or good spirits or bad spirits. But what we were talking about is the idea of good and evil, and I was wondering. And we were going into the realms of like what God is and synchronicity, and how maybe synchronistic things are inspired or created by a God energy, not an old man on a throne, but kind of like the energy of the universe. One of the things I'm trying to get around in my head is if we as souls are connected to God, and God is about love and about positivity and about creation, how do we then explain the Inquisition and the communists and the Nazis and all the scum basically of the universe? So Ian, over to you. How do you kind of like
anybody who gets into this field, you've got to wonder about the good and evil, because there's no doubt about it, there is evil. I mean, there's horrible evil in the world and everything, and it's the question is it a force like the devil, or is there a good force like God? The way I see it, because I don't come from a religious background, is we were talking about I believe time and space is an illusion. And if time and space is an illusion, there's no such thing as time or space. And it means that creation is now. We're all co-creating. And if we are part of the universe, we're part of the creative energy of the universe. And we're doing that now. And that might explain coincidences, strange coincidences that link across time, because there's no such thing as time or space. Maybe the universe is like a huge art installation, or maybe the universe likes to play, and maybe it likes to do things, and maybe even though there's no time, the universe is developing, and maybe we're building the universe. Now let's look at the idea of inertia. It's hard to do things. It's hard to push a stone uphill. The minute you do anything, you get some resistance, and this is where I think the nature of good and evil comes from. So if we think that there's a defined place or state of the universe that it wants to go to, maybe the universe is an organism that's developing, and maybe it wants to go to a certain place. We could call that good, ultimately. We don't know what it is. We can say that is what the universe wants to be or is heading towards. Anything that would thwart that, you would say, well, that's the opposition. That's bad. So let's take this idea. You're in a car. The car's stationary. You open the window. You put your hand out the window. What do you feel? Nothing. You go forwards. What do you feel? You feel your hand being pushed backwards. You might say that's the opposition. That's bad. But actually, it's just the opposition from your own forward motion. That's because the air doesn't want to move. You go in the opposite direction, you get your arm being pushed back in the opposite direction. So I think the universe has got inertia, and I think that what we call bad is when we actually try and make a change and we get resistance. Now, I'm not saying it's a blind force, because I actually think that the universe, when we get the resistance, somehow it can be personified. And you could argue that there may be part of the universe doesn't want, maybe it has got wants, maybe it is an organism, doesn't want to change, doesn't want to develop, and it will resist you. And that opposition you would experience as bad in your life. And maybe it's manifested through the Nazis and all horrible stuff like that. And equally, it may be that the bit of the universe that wants to go forward, you might call it the angels, will help you. So when you think about forces and personification of a universe that wants to develop and doesn't want to develop, the resistance, I think that might explain some of it. Of course, I don't know. It's just my semi-scientific sounding way of saying, yeah, there is good and evil. But it makes sense to me, because, if you don't do anything, you never experience anything. If you don't make a change, you won't experience any opposition. It's when you start to make a change or experience opposition, that's when you start to experience opposition. I mean, so one thing I've noticed in my life, that once you begin to develop in any sphere, you come up against some opposition. Now, if you're doing bad stuff, you'll get opposition from the good guys.
Yeah.
So it works both ways. So it's inertia. Once the universe is in a state, it doesn't want to change in either direction. So, and the dynamic tension is between which way does the universe want to develop? Is it in one direction, or does it not change? Does it want to go back to the place where it came from?
Are
That's
you a
how I
fan of
see.
the Matrix, Ian?
Sorry.
Are you a fan of the Matrix trilogy film?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's Gnostic, isn't it? It's the idea that that we're in a sort of constructed reality with the demiurge, which is like the evil version, the lesser god. Yeah, I love all that. Obviously, who doesn't?
Some of the conversations between Neo and the Oracle and the
Yeah.
Architect and
Yeah.
even Smith are absolutely fascinating, where
Mm.
the Oracle represents the spirituality, the Architect represents kind of like rational and reason and logic, and the Architect's job is to create balance in the universe, and the Oracle's job is to create imbalance.
Yeah.
and the Neo Smith.
Have you ever read the Michael? I probably don't know this. Michael Moorcock. You heard of Michael Moorcock?
No, not heard of him.
No. Well, I used to love the Michael Moorcock. He was a musician and science fiction writer. If you ever remember the band Hawkwind?
Yeah.
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 I used to love Hawkwind when I was a teenager. They were my band. They were space rock. And he was associated with the band Hawkwind, and he wrote some really, really good, trashy pulp science fiction. And the idea, he had this idea, but really, really good. I used to love it. I don't think I'd read it now, but I really, really meant something to me when I was a teenager. And the idea is that you've got this balance between the forces of chaos and the forces of order, and that there's always this dynamic balance, and that the eternal hero, which always had the initials JC, Jesus Christ, or Jariak, or Jerry Cornelius, and he was always at the fulcrum of this balance. And the idea was to maintain the balance so the universe didn't get out of kilter. And that's something there, isn't there? We all feel that, I think.
It's only something that really made me kind of like, whoa. I don't know if you ever listened to Bashar, not Bashar al-Assad, but Bashar, channeled by Daryl Anka.
No, I haven't. No.
But he's kind of like this spiritual entity being that kind of like gives very interesting, quite funny talks on things. And one thing, very simple thing that he said was, really, in the bigger picture of things, there's only one person in the room. In other words, there's really just one soul. In other words, I'm talking to myself as I'm talking to you. You're talking to yourself as you're talking to me. We're experiencing it. Well, I'm experiencing it from this perspective.
Yes. Yes, we're different points of view of the universal consciousness. I mean, that makes sense to me. I mean, who knows? Go and prove it. But it certainly makes sense to me, because all this talk to anybody who's a hard-nosed scientist is like complete rubbish, isn't it? Really, I mean, they don't want to know. But when you've experienced weird stuff in your life,
you can't go back.
You can't go back.
I've had it myself, Ian. Once the door is open, you cannot.
Is it the blue pill? Which is the pill that you take to open your eyes? Is it the red pill?
It's the blue pill, yeah.
It's the blue pill. Well, we've taken the blue pill, and we can't go back. It's simple as that. We've gone down the rabbit hole.
Trouble is, I'm on a repeat prescription for him.
Now we're knee deep in rabbit droppings, and the rabbits are just dragging us down further. So, shall we talk about the Enfield Poltergeist now?
Yeah. Please do.
So, of course, I've got no personal experience of the actual Poltergeist. It was long over by the time I entered Enfield. But so I'm sitting in the Eagle House Surgery common room one day, and we've got a temp secretary there, and she's reading the Enfield Advertiser, and she said, "What's this about the Enfield Poltergeist?" This is when the film The Conjuring and then the BBC films were being made. She said, "I've never heard this. What's this Enfield Poltergeist?" So I told her the story. And she said, "Oh." Anyway, at the time, I was doing ghost hunting. One of my patients, a guy called Mark, ran a ghost hunting group. And when you go ghost hunting, you tell the police station where you're staking out, and you wear T-shirts with the logo on it of the ghost club, so they know that these strange guys hanging around the church or whatever are actually who they are. So Mark was quite insistent we go get some T-shirts. Now, there's a place, a firm called Direct Boot and Shoe. You probably see their adverts all over North London. They do T-shirt printing. Actually, they weave T-shirts. They embroider logos. They've got this really neat sewing. It does coloured thread. And it's computer graphics. So they put the logo in, and it weaves it in a machine. So I had to go and get these T-shirts. They were there was a design there, and I had to go up there and buy a couple of T-shirts. And Mark said it wouldn't take long. They take 10 minutes for them to make it. So it just so happens there was a visit in the home visit book. I just had a chat about the Enfield Poltergeist. Went downstairs, looked in the home visit book, Oh, it's a guy called Derek. He's just had an operation and he's recovering. He wants you to give him a signal and have a look at him. I thought, I'll go around there because it's right by Direct Boot and Shoe. So I thought, well, I'll go up, park outside Direct Boot and Shoe, get my t-shirt, then pop in to see Derek and sort him out. So I go into the shop, but it took about an hour for them to do the t-shirts. So I knocked on Derek's door. I said, I'm sorry I'm late, Derek, but I was in Direct Boot and Shoe. He said, what are you getting? I said, I'm getting some t-shirts. I do a bit of ghost hunting. And he said, oh, you should have a chat with my dad. He's into all that. So, yeah, after I spoke to Derek and given him his sick note and everything, his dad, Terry, had come over. Derek just had an operation. Terry and Derek's mum had come over from Spain. They lived in Spain. They come over to look after him. It was a lovely guy. And I said to Terry, I went down, I said, look, to give this prescription, get it from the chemist with Derek, you'll make him feel better. And Derek said, you're into ghost hunting. I said, how come? He said, I am the son of the Enfield Poltergeist. I thought, and I knew, hello, this is it. We're off on a jaunt now because, you know, that's a coincidence, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I said, I've just been talking about that. I said, what happened? He said, yeah, the spirit Bill Wilkins, who came through this. So the story goes is that he was watching Strange But True, the Michael Aspel, which is really very good.
Good evening. The most remarkable case of poltergeist activity this century took place in 1977. It occurred in North London, and it's known across the world simply as the Enfield Poltergeist.
And I say that I rate that as the best documentary on it. And he suddenly realised that in it they said that someone had said that he was a relative of the spirit of the man who died in the house. And he realized that it was the house that he grew up in. And that the spirit was called Bill. His dad was called Bill. So he looked it up, he contacted Michael Aspel, and it turned out that his dad eventually he lost his sight and he died in the armchair there. And further, he said that Terry's mum had the same name as Mrs. Hodgson, first name. And he's convinced that the reason why his dad was there, because he realized that there was a Peggy there, and he thought it was his wife. Anyway, so then, so what happened? Yeah, I went back to the surgery, and I left something for Terry to pick up for his son. So Terry came down. So then I took him upstairs and introduced him to the secretary. I said, by the way, you know that poltergeist? This is the son of the Enfield Poltergeist. So it was a really nice coincidence, wasn't it? Now, eventually the film came out. The Conjuring 2 came out. Oh my God, that was just rubbish. I mean, I actually saw that at the Ghost Club. Alan Murdy presented it. We were wetting ourselves with laughter. I don't know if you've seen it, especially the bit where the false teeth bite someone. So they're in this cellar, a basement in a house in Enfield. Now, houses in London, in Enfield, 1930, do not have American basements, which are like that deep with water, which then fill up with water, and then false teeth go and then bite into your backside. It doesn't happen. And
the Slender Man. What the hell is the Slender Man got to do with in any way of the end?
Absolutely, an internet meme type thing. But the BBC one was a bit more interesting.
That was Timothy Spall, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was good. And but the problem with that is they portrayed Terry, who was a lovely guy, right? Derek's son, as a clapped out, knackered alcoholic in a council flat. I mean, they interviewed him on that. And that was really upsetting to the family. I mean, really, really upsetting. Actually, it's an insult.
Yeah.
And Derek's brother actually took it up with the BBC. I don't know what happened with it. But I mean, obviously it wasn't withdrawn or anything, but it was a really upsetting thing because it actually made Terry out to be someone. I mean, Terry was a lovely guy, you know, happily married, came over to look after his son. What more could you want? And they portrayed him to be
BBC telling fibs.
Well, exactly. Yeah. So that's so. In fact, I said to Derek, "Do you mind if I mention this?" Because on the interview, he said, because he's a Facebook friend of mine. He said, "No, Ian, tell them because you know the more people who know the truth, the better." Though Terry is convinced that was his dad, But of course, there were, when you read the books, there were more entities than just Bill who came through. There were some female entities. So, I mean, and certainly some of the towards the end of it, the girls could actually make this noise. They could mimic the spirits coming through with their own voices because they knew what they sounded like. But it could well be, as I said, it was a form of spontaneous physical mediumship, actually, with a little bit of spontaneous psychokinesis, you know, because the girls were just doing it themselves unconsciously themselves. I mean, the photographer who witnessed it at first, I think called Morris, I think his name was, he was interviewed recently, and he said, well, it absolutely happened, but I don't buy the spirit hypothesis. I can't believe that. So it's a lot to take on. It certainly caused a lot of things. The problem I have is, you know, this idea that the girls, but they did a laryngogram of the girls, and they realized that the voice was coming from not their larynx, but but from the false vocal cords, which is just above the larynx.
Right.
Right. And in this book I'm reading, they said that explains where the voice came from, and it also explains how when they put tea in the girl's mouth, the voice came through. But I'm sorry, I don't. But if your mouth's closed and it's full of tea, I still don't see. You can make a growling noise. I don't see how you can form words like that coming out. That doesn't make sense.
I'll tell you what, let's try it right now. Let's try it right.
No, you'll make yourself exactly. And the other thing, did you
get any of that?
You know Andy Serkis, who did Gollum?
Oh yeah.
Now Andy Serkis, I think he was using his false vocal cords to that. And if you listen to him, he says he had to have special Gollum juice. He had to drink this because it made his throat really sore. And Maurice Grosse makes the point, actually, that if you do that for a couple of minutes, you will have a really, really sore throat and you won't be able to speak. It's exactly what Andy Serkis says. He said it really played havoc with his voice. And he had this special fruit juice that felt lubricated it. So I think there's a lot more going on than just that.
This photographer who says he doesn't think it's spiritual. What does he think it is?
Well, I think he thinks he said it was definitely happening. A lot of people think it was just psychokinesis. In other words, psychic powers without the spirit hypothesis. You know, the spirits are difficult to deal with. I mean, when I started getting this weird stuff happen to me, the idea of dealing with spirits is very medieval to the modern mind, isn't it? I mean, you think about it. You know, you're going back pre-enlightenment. Is it everything spirits? It's difficult. It's a big ask to ask someone who's grown up in the modern world that actually there might be discarnate entities. Because once you start opening up that, then you've really got to consider a whole new way of thinking. I've embraced that now. I think I'm not saying it's real. I don't know, but I'm prepared to entertain it. It's a useful hypothesis, and it may be real. Do you know
who lives at the 284 Green Street now and what it's used for?
Well, I don't know. There was a thing going on YouTube. Did you put it up, Neil? Someone put it on YouTube recently. A guy just visited it, and he went to 284, and there's a window in this house.
Yeah, this guy going around all the towns, and I said, "Oh, this will interest you. It's your hometown."
And it's got Jesus. It says Jesus House now on it.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but it's But I mean, what other links do I have with it? Well, I gave a talk about my experiences at the Society for Psychical Research, and I met Guy Playfair there. Actually, I was at a party. There's a woman called Rita Leake, and she's lovely. She's a member of the Society for Psychical Research, and she invites everyone back to her Chelsea house. She's got a lovely house in Chelsea, and she just has everyone over there. And I ended up speaking to Guy Playfair, and he was telling me about his experiences. And Guy actually subsequently wrote the blurb for my book. So that's how I met Guy. So I met Maurice and Guy. The last thing Maurice Grosse said to me, I thanked him because he gave me about an hour and a half, 2 hours of his time. And I remember standing outside his front door, shook his hand, and he grasped my hand. He said, Ian. He said, first of all, he said to you, Ian, I told him about Felicity's face. He said, Ian, you know what you are, don't you? I said, no. He said, you're an undeveloped medium. So I hadn't told him I was in the circle because I thought he wouldn't approve, you see. So I said, well, actually, Maurice, I have to say that I'm actually developing. And then the last thing he said as I shook his hand was, I have absolutely no doubt that there is life after death. And then a year later, of course, he died. So now he does know. But he was a lovely guy, very, very nice. The Mark, the guy who ran this, my patient who ran the ghost club I told you about, knows PC Heaps, the woman WPC.
Yeah.
Who saw it. Now, I've never met her, but this is just hearsay, but he said that she refuses to talk about it.
Oh, wow.
It absolutely terrified her. She wants nothing to do with it. She's absolutely convinced it was real. And the other thing I know is that one of my patients' families was related to the lollipop lady there's a zebra crossing outside the house. And there's a school on the other side. And the lollipop lady saw, I think, the woman, one of the girls levitating, and saw a cushion, a pillow on the roof.
Wow.
And now I never met her, but I met her relatives, and they said, "Oh yeah," she said, "Yeah, she always went on about that. She absolutely believes it happened." And I had one of my Helen was one of my secretaries, lived not next door but very close, and she was a young girl when it was happening. She said there are all sorts of noises coming from the house. She said, everybody knew the house was haunted. So it was well known for being the real deal.
How long did it last?
I think it started at the end of August 1977, and I think after about a year it started to die down. And I think there were bits and pieces. I think after a couple of years it had more or less stopped. I think that the phenomena followed Janet at school as well. And she spent some time in the Maudsley Hospital being psychiatrically evaluated, and they said there's nothing wrong with her. And things calmed down a bit when she came out. But I think some stuff still happened in the house even when she wasn't there.
Right.
Which is very interesting. So you talk about the focus, but how come she wasn't there? Some stuff happened. Certainly it followed her to school. And poltergeists can follow people. Before lockdown, I used to attend meetings at the Ghost Club very regularly. Have you heard of the Ghost Club?
I think I've heard you mention it. Yeah, I've never
so
been
the Ghost
there.
Club is the oldest paranormal research society in the world. It was founded by, I think, Charles Dickens and those. It was a Victorian gentleman's club for telling ghost stories. It was very popular in Victorian days. And over the years, it had some very famous people associated with it. And eventually, they'd go out on ghost hunts and everything and tell stories. And it's waxed and waned, but the traditions kept on going. And Alan Murdy now runs it. He's actually a barrister. He's a lovely guy. He writes in 14 Times, very good articles, 14 Times. He's very, very knowledgeable. And he invited me to give a talk about my experiences there. And they offered to pay me. I said, well, I'll tell you what, don't pay me. Make me a lifetime honorary member of the Ghost Club. so me and my wife, we go there. And it's really nice. Before lockdown, we'd go. But we haven't been since, obviously. And one of the guys there actually joined it because he had a poltergeist in his flat. Now, I'm not going to mention his name because he might not want me to say it. But this guy is in his early 70s, trained as a physicist, but then became a writer, quite an avant-garde writer. He gave me one of his books to read, did my head in. It's very literary. I mean, if it's more than 5 words in a sentence, I can't read it, But I said, I couldn't read your book, but anyway. But now he joined the Ghost Club because he was in his he lives in a flat in Bloomsbury, and when he moved into the flat, he realised that the neighbours were at loggerheads, and they were all accusing each other of making noises and banging on walls. And he kept out of it. Then he was lying on his bed one day, and he had a shirt on a hanger on the handle of his wardrobe, like you do before you put it in the wardrobe. He was lying down. He said, I saw the hanger lift up, come off the hanger, and then it was thrown to the floor. He said, the minute I saw that, 2 things happened. First of all, I realized all the physics I knew was wrong. And secondly, it hit him that what was going on was actually a poltergeist. And it suddenly made sense because all these noises and bangs were going on. and he calls it George. But he doesn't want the Ghost Club to do an investigation there, because one of the neighbours is quite delicate and suffers from depression, and he doesn't want to upset them. And he's been told quite right that if you don't give it the energy, eventually it will die down. So he's hoping it will die down. He says he's got used to it now, but he said, interesting enough, he went to stay with his nephew in Cornwall once, and the phenomenon followed him there.
That's interesting.
So, and he's not a teenager. Now, you could argue that he's quite open to this, because, you know, he was a physicist who then gave up physics and started writing avant-garde literature. He's obviously not a closed-minded mind. He said there was, like, he was in his hotel room, you know, so he's in the room staying with his nephew, and there was this loud bang, like a gunshot. And that's exactly what would happen in his flat. So there you go, just another story. That's not the Enfield Poltergeist, though.
Yeah, it's got a connection. There's a question of what is it, and is it location based, or is it person based, or is it both?
Well, they say a ghost is a haunted place and the poltergeist is a haunted person.
Yeah.
So I suppose in the case of that guy, yeah, that figures.
There was a friend of mine actually, whose mum used to teach the girls, the Enfield Poltergeist girls, whatever primary school they went to. Now, she said apparently they were a little odd, but that's all she really divulged.
Well, I expect they're shaken by their experience. I mean, really, you've got to be. You can't come out really normal after that.
Well, the fact the family did have problems. I think the father had been in Claybury Hospital with mental problems. That was an old mental hospital, psychiatric hospital. There were Billy and Johnny, weren't there? I think one of the Billy was. I think Johnny had been sent to a home boarding school because he had difficulties. Not surprising if you've got a father who's not well. And I think Billy, the younger boy, had a very bad speech impediment. So there was obviously a lot of difficulties in the family, but you often find that psychic phenomena occur when there are difficulties. They happened in my own life. I mean, I was going through a difficult time with my mum and dad. I actually fell out with them at the time, and my sister. And that's what started the energy released from that, I think, was spent up in my family. And I think that's actually what precipitated my opening. It's called a Kundalini experience, isn't it? You know, the idea, you heard of that?
Yeah. I've heard of Kundalini, but I didn't realise it was an experience trigger.
Well, Kundalini is often experienced with sexual awakening, but actually it's a Hindu concept. The idea is you've got this energy at the base of the spine, which is viewed as a coiled serpent. And the idea is that the energy travels up the spine, opening up your chakras, as it does, you know, these psychic centers, until it hits the top of your head and comes out and then links with the higher energy. And that's this awakening is called Kundalini. It's often as your chakras open, the chakras being psychic centers that have various sort of things linked with them, this being communications chakra, this being your third eye, this being the link to spirit, this being your love center, this being your intuition center, and a couple of others. And as they start to work, then you start to have psychic experiences. So certainly when you're developing as a medium, you use this model. It may or may not be real, but it's a very useful model. The idea is that when you talk about opening up to spirit, literally what you're actually doing in your mind is opening up your chakras, which all sounds a bit, oh yes, it's my chakras. You know, oh yeah, my chakras.
Oh, misaligned.
I never thought that I'd be saying this. You know, 65-year-old doctor at the my professor saying, "Oh, it's me chakras." But there you are. It's a bugger. That's what life does to you, right? So that's so you use that. So the Kundalini experience can be quite devastating, you know, if it's not handled properly. As I said, it can be destabilizing. I mean, I had my own Kundalini experience. And I guess you could say that the family were dealing with this sort of rather disturbing energy.
Did you have poltergeist stuff as this was going on?
Pardon?
Did you have poltergeist activity as your Kundalini was being activated?
No. So in my case, I started to hear. So it started when a patient started to give me a message. So when I had all this problem in my family, I realised that my family had a problem going to my grandfather, the one I never met. He was my mother's grandfather. and he was a baker in the East End, and he was a bit of a gambler. He used to take the money out the till, put it on the horses. So that caused problems in the family. And I realized that the problems I had with my mum and dad, my cousins had similar problems. And because with my GP hat on, looking at how families, the dynamics of families, I realized we had a family problem. So, and because I was really upset after falling out with my family, basically my wife and I had been booted out of my cozy little family, my mum and dad and my sister. And basically I realized that this was a similar problem that my cousins had. I had quite a large family. And I interviewed my cousins, my uncles and aunts, and I traced it down to my maternal grandfather, who I'd never met. And I was thinking about that. And then one day, this patient came into my room at the end of the surgery. He was late. And he looked at me and said, "Sorry, doc, I've got this man here. He's the grandfather you never met. And he wants to speak to you." And I thought he was mad. But as I'd been thinking about my grandfather, and that Keith, my dear patient Keith, who's now my friend, Keith Bishop, had this message, I listened to it. And the message was, well, he told me everything that was going on in my family, and then said that you should be listening to spirit. I thought he was mad. I didn't even know what listening to spirit meant. And he said, "You're like a man on the edge of a cliff, doc. Take a leap of faith off that cliff. Don't worry, they'll catch you." I said, "Who?" He said, "The spirits." I said, "You're mad." And then after that happened, I started, well, one of the things that happened was I walked into my room one day, and as I left my room to go on a home visit, which was within walking distance, so I put my car keys on the desk because I walked to the patient. I felt a blow to the back of my neck and heard a voice saying, "Pick up your keys or they're going to get stolen," which I ignored. And when I came back, my keys had been stolen, and it caused me no end of trouble. Stuff like that, just weird stuff. But it was benign and it was helpful, because it would have been even more if I'd have listened. But I got there in the end, And ultimately, because I had a lot of support, a lot of help from my patients and my wife and my colleagues, I got through it, and it's developed, and it's become a thing, And so, I'm very grateful for that, and it has enriched my life. I may still be a bit unbalanced. I probably am a bit unbalanced, but put it like this: all the patients who hear voices come and see me. They say, "I know you know what it's like," right? So I've got a lot of them, and because when I as a GP trainee, I did psychiatry, and my first house job after I did when I was at North Mid was a psychiatric job. I remember saying to my senior registrar then, I said, "Look, we're sectioning these people, putting them under the Mental Health Act. They see stuff. I've seen stuff. I saw my friend's face change." And my senior registrar was a very wise man. He'd been a missionary in Africa. He was quite Christian. He said, "The difference is, Ian, is that what you saw enriched your life, but what these people see, this makes them uneasy. It diseases them, right? They are diseased."
Yeah.
And that's a very useful point. He didn't say, obviously we treat them with drugs, and in those days you zap their brains. I can tell you a story about that with ECT. It's quite a funny story, but of course, from his point of view, I think he may have probably believed that some of them were dealing with spirits because he's quite religious. And there's a group in the Royal College of Psychiatrists who do entertain the hypothesis that some may be schizophrenia or something. Maybe they are in touch with something. Who knows? It's difficult. It's a very interesting hypothesis. I don't really want to go into that. I mean, I have had patients who have come to me and say, "Well, look, you know it's the spirits, don't you, doc?" And they have got schizophrenia. And I'm not going to take my medicine. So what I say to them, I think it's quite good actually, because it convinces them to take the medicine. So I say, "Look, I don't know. The psychiatrist obviously thinks you're ill. I mean, you're obviously upset by this. I don't know whether it's spirits or whether it's that. I don't have an opinion. Obviously I'm a doctor. I have to, treat you accordingly. And what I would say is, if you think it's spirits and therefore you don't take your medicine, let's say it is spirits, and let's say they're able to tune into you with your brain waves. Maybe the tablets the psychiatrists give you work. They believe it's for some reason. Maybe it's actually working by adjusting your brainwaves so they can't tune into you.
Mm.
And in other words, it's a different model, but the effects same. And actually, I've had a couple of patients say, "Oh yeah, that makes sense, doc. I'll take my tablets." Then they come back and say, "Oh, it's worked, doc." But of course, they can't tune in now. No, I don't. I mean, I don't believe that. I mean, I'm sure there is a physical hypothesis for schizophrenia, but you see what I'm saying? When you begin to think in different ways outside the box and begin to realize that other people have different ways, they have to think in a way that means something to them. You can then use that. So what I found is that having explored this area and seeing different viewpoints, I can then communicate better to my patients who also have different viewpoints.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I spoke to a psychiatric nurse once, not I was being sectioned, but she was actually in a spiritualist group. And I said, "Oh, that's quite interesting. You're a psychiatric nurse and you're in a spiritualist group." And I said, what would you say is the difference between a medium and somebody who's got schizophrenia or a psychiatric condition? And she said something very, very true, and that's held this day. It's the information that counts. So if you've got a clock that's talking to you and telling you to set fire to the house, that's very different from somebody who's telling you that they're a nan and what they look like, what their name was, and when they were born, and kind of like how many sisters they had. It's whether the information checks out and whether the information is on a positive vibration connected to somebody that you should not know, but the person you're talking to would know and can identify and check out.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense to me. I mean, obviously, whatever is going on, if we have got a spiritual component, it's mediated through the brain. So you can understand that there'll be pathological conditions at all sorts of levels. Everything goes wrong. Just because it's in the spirit world doesn't mean it doesn't go wrong. I mean, we were having this idea about the cosmic building site with someone's doing that, which I'm sure things go wrong, but it gets corrected. The art installation has defects which become features, if you see what I mean. Yeah. So everything goes wrong at every level. So I'm sure, obviously things will go wrong with your brain. And you interpret everything through your brain, so that makes sense. There might be a spiritual component of some of things. Who knows? The other thing is that when I joined my psychic development group, because I was very suspicious. I remember sitting in this spiritualist church. There was this guy, Joe, and he looked like Gollum. He had a shaved head. He covered in tattoos. I thought, bloody hell! And he said, "He's relaxed, Doc. We're not going to eat you." Anyway, he's a lovely guy. But what I was most impressed with, of course, is that spiritualist churches do attract disturbed people. People who have got mental health conditions, and far from pandering to them, they're very astute at recognizing the people who are not quite right and directing them away, so they don't, because it can be very destabilizing. This, and they're very, very, they've got a long history of recognizing, as Keith Hudson said, well, this field it do attract them, Ian. It do attract them. We're used to dealing with them.
Right,
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, that's the thing I didn't realize. I thought they were all cranks and kooks, but they're not. Most spiritualists are very down to earth people.
Do you think that some of these people that do have this kind of condition, psychiatric condition, they're hearing voices, that it's just not a form of mediumship that's fully kind of materialized or developed within them, that because of their brain condition they might have had a sense of potential mediumship, but because there's something wrong psychologically elsewhere with them, it just can't cut through the white noise as such?
If mediumship's real, but I mean, equally, who are we? I mean, if you look in yourself, if you do any sort of meditation, you realize that you've got multiple selves. I mean, there's Ian right now, he's having a lovely conversation. Then there's the rather depressed Ian who wakes up in the morning. There's Ian. I mean, there's all different sorts of people inside me. Well, we all have the different faces, aren't we? And you can imagine Noam Chomsky, I think, who's an intellectual philosopher. He calls it the society of mind, and the idea is that you have these different bits of your mind that all sort of compete with each other. And you can imagine that, maybe there's that, different networks within the brain all competing, bit of software running a bit, all trying, and then sometimes you can't integrate it. But then you can imagine, well, maybe a bit of software runs on a computer that, maybe it's all running on the Matrix computer. I mean, there's a guy.
Maybe sometimes some software gets viruses.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's a guy called Robert. Hang on, I'm getting confusing. there's a guy called Don Hoffman, and he's working on a theory. He's a scientist that actually the universe derives from mind. So the physical world. So there's always been this debate that how can spirit interact with matter if they're two separate entities? And what he says is, well, actually, matter is like virtual reality existing in an information network, which is mind, right? And so he's got a mathematical description. And he says he reckons he's working on a theory that can postulate the universe is derived from interacting conscious entities. And he says that there is a universe, but what reality is actually like when you look at your computer screen, when you have icons for like the recycle bin, there isn't really a recycle bin in your computer. When you move a file into a recycle bin, it's something else is happening on the hardware. But what you're seeing is the interface. And what he's saying is that actually our brains and our bodies and everything around is the interface. So we don't know who we are.
The hologram as such.
Yeah, but we are. It's not us. Even our brain, even our nervous system is an interface. And we're actually a lot more than that. So you can postulate all sorts of interesting things from that. But we just don't know. I mean, we know nothing, don't we, really?
Yeah. Reminds me of the Seth material.
The more you think you know, the more you realise you don't know.
Yeah. Well, Jane Roberts, when she contacted this entity, Seth, I say contact, he contacted her. Initially through the Ouija board back in 1963 with her husband. And she, before that, spontaneously went into a trance and wrote something down, like a 1,000-word essay or something called the Universe as an Idea Construction, it was titled. And it's basically how the whole universe is just an idea in a mind somewhere or something, which was then later developed into the Seth material, which is very, very fascinating to read. I've recommend it.
I've dipped into and out of it over the years. The way I consider myself to be a Fortean, Charles Fort, 14 times. So his philosophy was that, which I think is truly scientific. He said, I think of any hypothesis, any hypothesis is I consider to be a mere set of clothes to wear for a time until they're discarded. and that's so in other words, keep your options open, bear everything in mind, and what works at the time you can use, and when it no longer works, then you have to go on to something else. So I think as a GP, I work within the medical model. It works. I prescribe medicines, and it makes sense, the physiological framework, the way the psychology works, it all makes perfect sense to me. It's a model. It's a useful model. It's probably right within its limits, whatever right means. But when it doesn't work, I'm quite happy to use the Chinese model, acupuncture. It also works. And then obviously I pick up messages and bugger me. That seems to work sometimes. It gives people comfort, especially with bereavement counselling. Keep your options open and don't be wedded to any particular hypothesis. Just be prepared to change your mind. Keep it open. You've got to be flexible. If it works, use it. If it doesn't, discard it. Which is what Silver Birch said. You ever read the Silver Birch?
Oh, Maurice Barbanel's Spirit Guide.
Exactly. Yeah. He said, "Don't take my word for it. If it insults your intelligence, ignore it.
Yeah.
If it appeals to you, then work with it," which I think is a very useful,
very logical. Yeah. Have you had any conversations with spirit guides like in Circle? Has any people channeled them and you've asked them questions or anything?
I've never been that impressed when people start talking in funny voices, I'm afraid. It just makes you. However, there's one guy called Craig, and he works at, funnily enough, on my journey, I ended up going, so I started at my mum's house with me or my arguments, ended up going to a circle at the top of the road where my mum and dad lived, literally on the corner, like 200 yards away. It's a healing sanctuary in Winchell Hill called the Sylvan Healing Sanctuary in Hoppers Road, Winchell Hill. I call them a bunch of the lost tribe of spiritualists. You have these relict hominoids, like shambling Neanderthals who walk around. Well, in the old days, I'm not liking them to that. They're a lovely bunch of people. But do you know how spiritualism started off in the with home circles, 1920s? Home circles would be. Then it became formalized. The SNU got into it. Politics is now churches. Not so many home circles. This is a bunch of mediums, healers, who've had a home circle going since the 1960s.
Wow.
They've got nothing to do with the SNU, nothing to do with spiritualist politics, and they just meet and they meditate and they heal, and they have a discussion group every so often. So every so often I go for some healing. And there's a guy there called Craig. And Craig sometimes gives healing as Craig, and sometimes he channels the doctor. They call him the doctor. Now, as a doctor, if I meet someone who's a medic or a nurse, I just know. They just open their mouth and you know. Yeah? Just like a policeman would meet up and they'd know. Yeah? You just know. Normally, when someone's channeling, I think, I don't buy this. Craig walks into the room. When he's the doctor, he's like a colleague. It's just that there is a doctor there. So he's one of the few, the only one I've actually channeled where I've actually felt, this is real. This feels real to me. And actually, when he was giving me healing, he put his hand on my forehead, and I could actually see purple swirling lights under my closed eyelids. So I tentatively buy that.
Did you ask him any medical questions that perhaps might be difficult for laymen?
I was just having healing. But if you want to hear a really good story, I think I told this to Philip the other day, Philip Kinsella, but it's a really good story. There was a medium called George Chapman. He was an Aylesbury fireman in the 1960s, and he started channeling an entity who was called he claimed to be Dr. William Lang, actually called Mr. William Lang. He was a surgeon. You know, in this country, surgeons would be called the Mr. or Mrs. or Miss. This guy claimed to be Mr. William Lang, who was a deceased ophthalmologist, eye surgeon from Moorfields Hospital. And he would do psychic surgery. But he wouldn't pretend to cut. So George Hunt would go into trance, and this quite well-spoken voice would come through, and he'd be holding his hands over the paper, and he'd be clicking his fingers. I can't do it. He'd be snapping his fingers like he was asking assistants to give him tools, you know, this one, and he'd be speaking like there was something going on, like an operation. And he supposedly effected some very good cures. Well, William Lang's daughter heard about this and booked an appointment to see him, intending to unmask him. And when she saw him, she realized she was convinced it was her father.
Wow.
So far from unmasking him, she introduced George Chapman to his living colleagues who worked at Moorfields Eye Hospital. She had a circle at her house, which I believe ran for 30 years. 30 years. And every week, George Chapman would turn up, go into trance, and discuss with the surgeons, his previous colleagues, about advances that he was teaching them from the other side. So it said. One of them was a well-known ophthalmologist called Patrick Trevor Roper, and all medical students of my generation know that because Patrick Trevor Roper wrote the book Lecture Notes in Ophthalmology, which is what you use to study eye diseases. And when I heard that, because I was given the book to read about this by Roy Stemmen, who was associated with Psychic News. You may have come across Roy. He writes quite a lot.
The name's familiar, yeah.
Yeah, and he actually wanted me to review of his book. He had a book about this, but I didn't have time to do it. But I read the book, and what I found interesting is that these surgeons that met this guy, they were convinced that it was their colleague, and yet they didn't talk about it. If they'd have told the rest of the profession, look, this is coming through, maybe it would advance things, you know, because it's obvious that there are doctors who've done this, and I know historically there are lots of doctors involved with this, but they hadn't really embraced it. So so I suppose that I'm just one of a whole lot of doctors who've done this, but I haven't ever had any information from spirit guides, apart from my own spirit guide, of course, which I get all sorts of things told about, which is because I don't know if he's real or not. He calls himself Nestor. But I mean, you see, when you're developing as a medium, the spirits say that you have to get friendly with your guides, otherwise it's not going to work. And I had a really big problem with spirit guides. Okay, I could just about cope with mediumship. Okay, yeah, okay. I can cope with telepathy. I could buy that. And okay, and maybe we have got a discarnate part of us. Okay, if you believe that your brain's non-local, or your mind's non-local, fine. Okay. Spirit guides. That is just so much like, you know,
Fair.
no, it's not like those films, you know, Native American spirit guides. Yeah, it's a bit cringy, isn't it? Also, let's face it, hanging around you, are they watching what you're doing? Are they watching me when I'm in the toilet? You know, all this stuff. But actually, unfortunately, you reach a point where you have to deal with, when you're doing trainings, I mean, you have to deal with spirit guides because they start to make themselves known. Now, I still don't know if they're part of me. I have this internal debate, but what spiritually say is you have to challenge it. They have to prove that they're real. And I think I can say that I've had quite a bit of evidence. So I can't tell you all the stories because some of them are quite frankly bonkers. I mean, I gave a talk at the High Wycombe Paranormal. I explained how my guys presented themselves by a series of weird coincidences. But one that I didn't tell, which was really, really weird. So I've got another guide called Koza. He says, I mean, could be the crazy man talking here. I felt this tall African guy standing behind me one day in my surgery, and he basically tried to prove that he was real, I think. And I've told this story before. Basically, I was thinking about him one day. He said he was from South Africa, and that I was with him on a ship in a previous life in the 1800s. And so at the time, my son had recorded Lara Croft and the Cradle of Life. This was like in the days when we had VCRs and videotapes. And he recorded this before I actually got into spiritualism. And it was sat on the VCR for about a year, unmoving. And so everyone had gone to bed, and I was sitting up thinking about codes and all this crazy stuff was happening to me. I thought, I can't sleep. I think I'll watch this film. Because I quite like Angelina Jolie. So I watched Lara Croft and the Cradle of Life. I was watching it, and it's okay, but it was a kid's film. And after a while, I started thinking, this Koza's doing my head in. Then, as I'm thinking that, Angelina Jolie, as Lara Croft, picks up a phone, and on the phone she says, "Tell Koza to meet me north of the village. We're off to Kilimanjaro." I said, "What?" Pause. I'm definitely schizophrenic because schizophrenics get messages from TVs. Yeah. Rewind, play it back. It's definitely there. Well, that got my attention. The next half of the film was where her guide, Koza, was leading her off across the plains of Kilimanjaro, fighting off evil spirits. And I'm thinking, what? Next day I go to my circle and say to everyone, how does it happen? And they say, oh, the spirits can do that. And I'm saying, can't be. The spirits can do that. They're not gods. How does it work? Because as you said, because it's with coincidences, Paul had to record it. My son Paul had to record it. They had to audition Lara Croft, Angelina Jolie to play Lara Croft. It had to be there. I had to be. Oh, the coordination was impossible. How do they do that? They're not gods, your spirit guides, and that's where we talk about the role of coincidence. So that's one thing. The next time how it came through was, so my son had just qualified in medicine, and he actually did his first house job at Harlow Hospital. So he just finished. He trained at Cambridge and at the Royal London. He was about to do his first house job. Now, my son never talked about his girlfriends. At the time, he's packing up his clothes. And he said, "Oh, Dad, I've got a new girlfriend." I said, "Oh, really?" I said, "What's she like?" He said, "Oh, she's African." I said, "Oh, really? What country?" She said, "Oh, she's a medical student she's in the year below." He said, "She's from South Africa." Now, my guide came to be from South Africa because Koza is the name of the tribe. He said that's not his name. The Xhosa tribe are like Nelson Mandela, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. They're on the Eastern Cape. He said, I thought, hang on a minute, this is weird, because that morning I'd gone to the gym. I have a patient called Barbara who's a psychic, and she'd run up to me literally in that morning and said, I've had your flipping African guy with me all night, Ian. He's been trying to reach you. He says, you still don't believe him. He's going to bleed the world, prove himself. I thought, when is he going to do that? So Josh is, that evening, Josh is saying, oh, I've got this girlfriend. And she's from South Africa. And I thought, hang on a minute. I said, South African, yeah. Is she black South African? He said, yeah. Why'd you ask? I said, what tribe is she? She said, hang on a minute, Dad. Why are you asking me this? Are you a closet racist? You know, I said, he said, how do I know what tribe she's from? She came here when she was 8 and her mum's a head teacher in Bromley. I said, Josh, is she a Xhosa? He said, Dad, that's her surname. Cheers. Anyway, she was gorgeous. I met her. I mean, she brought her home and she read my book. And she said she read it on the way. She was flying to South Africa. And when she came back, she said, Ian, I read your book. And when I read your book, I almost fell off my chair. Because when Xhosa shows himself in my head, he shows himself by showing me a bare foot and a bare ankle with a beaded anklet around his ankle. I didn't know what that meant, but she said that is exactly what Xhosa warriors of that generation were given by their girlfriends, with the person they were going to marry. And that's something very precious to him. And he would, be proud to show that off to you.
Wow.
I mean, nothing happened. I mean, I thought, is she the one? But actually, no. I mean, they split up. But I think that was for me. I mean, now how does that work?
Yeah, I had a.
How does that work?
I had a very. I mean, we're coming up to the end of the show, but I'll just tell you this quickly. Yeah. A very interesting experience with an African spirit guide as well. Ironically, back in the late 80s, I was in a psychic developing circle. And once a kind of term, they'd bring this lady, Margaret, in who would channel her African spirit guide called Manico. And honestly, when she went into trance, she sounded like Fuzzy Bear of the Muppets.
I get it, because the bears and the cubs, they're both from... Oh, boy.
And I was trying, like you don't want to laugh. Where the hell can I put my face? And, oh, my God, here's Fuzzy Bear from the Muppets giving us wisdom from the spirit world.
And what you need to do with your life, you need to go in this direction.
I got some wisdom for you,
So anyway, I thought, it's fake, it's rubbish. And anyway, another term rolled by, and this lady was going to bring Manico here again. And during that time, I'd read the Jane Roberts book, Seth Speaks. And in there, Seth said that Christ did not die on the cross. He was actually switched. Someone else died and replaced him. I thought, that's a bit controversial. I wonder if this Manico would know anything about that, So I couldn't actually go to it. I wasn't feeling great. So I asked a friend of mine who was going to it. I said, look, could you ask this question? And I said, could you ask this Manico, did Jesus die on the cross? So she goes, yeah, okay, I'll do that. So she went there and she goes, oh, Manico, because he's just about to go back to the spirit world. Oh, Manico, before you go, can you tell me one thing? Now, she never mentioned my name. She just said, could you tell me, did Jesus die on the cross? And he paused and he says, give us a moment. And he came back after 10 minutes, like he had to go somewhere and try and find out.
Hang on, I'll just ask him.
Yeah.
Oi, Jesus, what happened? Yeah.
And he came back and he said,
we do not know the answer.
And I said, that's definitely great. Yeah, because Frank Oz, who did the voice of Fuzzy Bear.
Sounds more like Yoda.
Yeah, he did both voices apparently. So that's why I sound like Yoda. So anyway, this Manico says we don't know the answer. And as soon as I heard that, I thought, that's it, completely fake. Now, during this same time, I was experimenting myself with channeling spirit guides because I read this book on it. And I thought I had got this guide at the time who was like a writer, a Victorian writer called Henry. So every week I was trying to channel him and tune into him and stuff like that. Now, this was a week after this supposed Manico said we don't know the answer. I was expecting this Henry to come through, and I got my little instructions, practicing the meditations and stuff. Then suddenly, in my mind, I saw this visual of looking over the cross from above, looking down on the shoulders of a man who was on the cross, Jesus or someone, And I thought, what's going on here? Why am I seeing this? And then suddenly this voice came out of me exactly like Fuzzy Bear. Saying, it said, "You were the one that asked the question." And I went, what? And then it said, yeah. And then it said, "I am Manico." And it completely freaked me out that I came out of trance. So that was me completely thinking the whole thing was crooked and fake and everything.
Yeah.
And this then suddenly happened to me.
This
So
thing
what was the
is.
answer? Did he
No,
go?
we still don't know. Jury's out.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think he's real because I can't. He proved himself to me.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing.
What's the
It
answer
rocked.
revealed to you?
The answer about was Jesus swapped? Do you mean? Is
Yeah.
that the answer? Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I never got the answer of that whether Jesus died on the cross or not. But according to Seth, Jesus didn't die on the cross, and that's why he went to India and was later seen, and they thought he was resurrected. That's how the whole idea came about, supposedly.
But the thing is about this field always wrong foots you. Just when you think you've got it nailed, something happens. Just when you think it's not real, something happens, and this is the trickster element to it. There's something, and it happens at Skinwalk. You know the Skinwalker Ranch.
Oh yeah.
Again, trickster elements there. UFO stuff. It's always the trickster element to it.
Why do you think that is, Ian? Why do you think that is?
Well, this guy who wrote The Trickster and the Paranormal, I can't remember his name, but you can get it, you can download it on Kindle. He says that we're dealing with liminal borderlands, with things that are in transition. They said that when you deal with things in transition, this part of the universe comes into play. It's like the universe doesn't know what it wants to be. And it's like the shifting sand, like 1 minute it's one thing, 1 minute it's wet, 1 minute it's dry. And this is the point where this trickster element plays up, because basically it's the psychological effect of being uncertain. You know, are we in this world? Are we in that world? Are we in between? We don't know. Psychologically, is it real? Is it a hoax? We don't know. But he didn't actually get any further than that. I know it sounds very nebulous, but if it's more sort of an artistic way of thinking, more of a symbolic way of thinking. If the universe got a logical side and it also has an artistic side, maybe it's the artistic side of the intelligence of the universe. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to express it, but it makes a sort of sense, but not the sort of sense, but not as we know it. Shall we say? It's different. It's differently sane. Not mad. It's just differently sane.
And on that note, I think we'll have to draw our insanity conclusions to a close. But thank you very much, Dr. Ian Rubenstein, for a wonderful, interesting 2 hours of discussion of the paranormal,
great fun, hasn't it?
poltergeists, and psychics, and everything all in between.
Yeah.
Any final words, Andy?
I was just going to ask a real quick one. Do you know, Ian, if the neighbours of 284 Green Street have got any psychic problems or paranormal problems?
I don't know. I don't know. I think it's all died down. You don't hear anything now. I mean, I'm sure if there was stuff going on, I'd hear about it.
They've probably got different neighbours now as well.
Yeah, but I mean, even, I don't think there's anything going on there now.
Cool. Yeah, fascinating interview, and we'll have to have you back on, Ian.
Yeah, more wonderful tales
if
of
you
the
can stand it.
Yeah,
That's been a great chat.
Oh, next time we need to talk about UFOs.
Oh, we'll have a subject.
Yeah, definitely.
That's a great one. Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for listening to us here, Andy, myself, and Neil, that's me, and Dr. Ian Rubenstein. So stay tuned for next time, and have a safe month.
Take care.